So this question came from Facebook, and it's talking about using satin stitches, and we can do satin stitches a couple of different ways, or satin areas. So what we're looking at here are stitches that are made kind of like satin stitches that go from one side to the other, then one side to the other. And you can define them a couple of different ways. We can create a satin area first of all, and if I just set points like this and create this shape right here, when I right click to finish, right click to deselect the tools, it has these purple markers in here. These purple markers are defining the direction of the stitches at that point. So the nice thing about using that satin area tool is you have a start and end point, so I can adjust where it starts and ends if I want to. So this one would begin here, probably travel down, but I'm adjusting the stitch direction using those purple lines. I'm going to undo that one. Now the other way that we can do these is by creating a satin column. And a satin column is created by using pairs of points to define the shape and the stitch direction. So as I set points here, I can make these wider. And the nice thing about using these rather than just a satin line is you can adjust the width of them so you're not just using a fixed width. And I adjust these. And for this one, when I right click, it's going to stitch the direction that I created it. So it's going to start here and stitch all the way around this corner. And these points here that are defining the shape are also showing me the direction the stitches are going to be at that point. So I'm going to come over here and delete that one. So then looking at this one, what we're seeing, because it looks really nice here on the screen, but when she got to the machine, there were some areas that were skipping. There were no stitches. And so my first question was, what are we seeing in the way of stitch length? When we work with a satin stitch, whether it's created with a satin line, a satin area, or a satin column, we want to think about what happens when we sew a satin stitch. And what we know about sewing a satin stitch, even in sewing mode, is the wider it is, the more it's going to pull in. The other thing I want you to know is if a satin stitch gets too wide, a machine will think it's a jump stitch and it will skip right past it. So when I'm using satin lines or any kind of satin stitch, what I think of is I want my satin stitch to probably be, if it's going to be something that I wear, no wider than about 5 or 6 millimeters. And if it's going to be something maybe that's on display, I don't want to usually go any wider than about an 8 or a 9. If you get any wider than that, there's going to be a lot of pulling and there's a real good chance that you're going to snag. So looking then at this design, if I go to my View tab, I'm going to use my Get Length. And if I measure a couple of these areas, I'm seeing here this is up at like 12.3. And once you get over about 12, that's where you're going to see machines start skipping stitches because it's just too long for it to embroider. And this one right here, for example, it's got some stitches that are up in the area of around like 19 millimeters long. So those are way too long. So what do we want to do about that? We're going to break this down into a couple of different pieces. Now what I could do, I do want to show one other option. I'm going to right click, and if I'm using a satin area, one of the nice things about the satin area is I could apply a pattern to it. So maybe I want to come in here and just choose just some kind of a decorative pattern. Now I'm not liking what it's doing in the corner here, so I might pick one that's a little less defined. But once I have that pattern in here, now I've got those stitches breaking up, so it's not going to end up with those really, really long stitches. But for this one, I'm going to delete it and show you how I would digitize this piece. So I'm under my blue, and I'm just looking at my artwork. I'm not going to go all the way down because I really just want to talk about how I'm going to deal with this corner right here. I'm going to go to Precise Create. And for this one, I'm going to use the satin column. I could use either satin column or satin area, but I know that for this, basically, I'm going to come from down here. I'm going to be traveling up through here, then traveling back down here. And I'm going to do this in 2 separate pieces. Starting with my satin column, and I'm just going to pick it up right here. I'm going to start by setting points to define this shape, and remembering also that as I create these lines, that's defining the direction of those stitches. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come to about there, and that's going to be my first piece. So now I know that I don't have really too wide of a stitch here. I'm going to right click to complete that. Then I'm going to pick it up right here, put my cursor on that yellow create cursor so I know it's going to be connected to the previous object. And I'm not going to come all the way down here because I think that's going to be a little bit wide. So I'm going to come and define this piece through here. And by creating this, and I'm going to get it close here, then I'll fine-tune my shape a little bit. So defining that as two pieces, I've kind of created that corner without having it to really go out to a miter. And when I right-click and finish, and if I look at my life view right now, it looks like I've got that nice sharp point. Oh, let me drag that down. A nice sharp point, but I've avoided those really long satin stitches that I wanted to avoid. Now on this yellow piece, I'm going to select it, go to the Home tab, and delete it. So even looking at this, I know I want all my stitches just because I think it's going to be prettier. I know I don't want my stitch going all the way up here. So I'm actually going to create this in, I think, 3 different pieces. So back at the Precise Create tab again, I'm going to do my satin column, start down here at the bottom, and create just these first few pairs. And I'm just going to come to about right here. Let me define that so it looks a little bit rounder. One of the nice things about working as we click points, we're able to control this shape. And I kind of want to get it close to where it is before I finish. I'm going to right click to finish. Now notice I just want to mention, I started down here in the lower left corner, and I went left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, because I knew this way I would end here on the right side. Now I want to get in place to do the second part, and let me move that. I wanted that to be under the yellow so that it was the right color. So in the film strip, I just dragged it up. I'm going to grab my running stitch tool. I already had it selected. I'm going to click Create Area or Line. I'm going to click on that yellow cursor so I know this satin stitch is, or this running stitch is going to be connected to that satin line. And I'm going to come down into here now. I'm going to do this a little bit to the left again. Right click, do another satin column, and get those pretty close together so I end up with a rounded kind of point at the bottom. And the main thing that I'm making sure here is that I'm keeping those lines traveling the direction I want, and that I am also getting those lined up. And on that one right there, I want to go in and probably cross over just a little bit right there. I'm going to right click and finish that, and then I'm going to immediately continue here, and I'm just going to do a couple of points there, right click. So now I've built that in 3 pieces, and when I zoom in, I'm going to end up with a really nice clean point there. And I've also avoided stitch lengths that are too wide. Now I do want to look at this and just make sure it's not too wide. So if I go over to my View tab again and grab Get Length and just measure that, it's at 7.5, 7.8. If it's going to be something that's going to be on display, it's probably going to be fine. If this was going to be worn, that might be a little too wide. So maybe what I want to do on this one is I'm going to come back over to Precise Create, and I'm going to use the Emboss Line tool. And Emboss Line lets me set stitch points inside a shape. So I had that satin column selected, this triangular one. I've clicked on Emboss Line, and I'm just going to set a point here and a point here. Right click, and you can see right there, and I might even take that up just a little bit more. Now halfway through that line, it's going to grab that little stitch point right there. So when it stitches out, I have that little ridge in the middle, but I know it's going to stitch much better. And that is how I'm going to approach digitizing those shapes and get us a much cleaner design that's going to stitch out, because right now when she got to the machine, it wasn't stitching all those long points. I hope this helped you learn a little bit more about the Satin Column tool, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.